Alright, I'm sitting here with Trevor Grassi. This is Nate Hankus. This is the Humboldt Lighthouse, episode 1. How do you describe yourself, Trevor? I think of you as a musician, artist.
Yeah, I play music, also make a lot of different kind of art, I guess, but how do I describe myself? Well, yeah, I guess jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah,
but,
kind of have to be if you live an artistic lifestyle.
Yeah. Try and travel a lot and do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And research things.
Yeah.
Things.
We've been working together this past month or so, and we've got some interesting conversations, so I wanted to talk about some of that stuff. Pretty deep conversations. The first time we met.
Way deep, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're saying part of your philosophy, I'm sure you've picked it up from others, is kind of in this lifetime, our goal, the goal of our lifetime is kind of grow the soul. I forget what terms you used, but...
Yeah. Well, I think there's only very few things that people do these days that really have any bearing on what they end up dying as or what they end up moving on as, because a lot of people don't believe that there is a soul that goes further, but most people kind of have some idea that there's some part of them would continue after death, but most people don't really think about what they're doing or how it's changing them, and I guess it seems like there's a few different kinds of things that you can be focused on in life that could actually bring about a more positive outcome once you move on to the next life.
So you're speaking of reincarnation specifically. Other traditions would have like a heaven or this karma concept.
Yeah, or I think there's a lot of different spaces you can go to, that not everyone is bound to reincarnate after this life. I think there's some level at which you can hit a point where some part of you does continue on and keep your own memories and your own who you were basically across many lifetimes. You can remember and reincarnate into another body, or eventually hit a point where you don't need to incarnate in a body and you can live as an entity without a physical incarnation.
Independently of the material world.
Yeah, which is, I think, really the goal, is purifying yourself and letting go of the material world and kind of balancing out all the different parts of yourself until you are able to let go of that body entirely and just be more like lucid dream consciousness, almost
This is kind of like a theme in all spiritual traditions, is to kind of eschew the material plane and focus on the more spiritual aspects. So how do you define spirituality and spirit?
Well, I think everything is actually matter and material, but just different densities and wavelengths, different vibrations, it's we're all in one world that's basically one radio station. If you tune it a tenth of a whatever, if you change the frequency of it, it's you're listening to a totally different radio station. We're just seeing one kind of level of density where the universe is being enacted on, and where we're seeing this, we're just seeing one aspect of the things that are happening. And when you end up moving above living as a human being, then if you don't need, you end up seeing the planes that are higher than that, and you end up realizing that there is a further place for evolution to take us, where we will become consciousness of a higher degree, expanded and experienced and hashed out and more learned, and you can get to see things from a higher perspective.
Well, I think even in this lifetime, you hear things like, you gotta raise your vibrations, man, or different frequencies. People use that language on like a smaller scale, perhaps. You can, when you're a younger person, you might be in a lower frequency where it's just about you, and then over your life you learn some lessons and you start to see things from a bigger perspective outside of yourself, maybe from the terms of like family or culture, society, or humanity as a whole. And that's just, in a way, that's, raising your frequency, or you're, changing that station a little bit, so it can go even beyond those things.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like it's like, a lot of people talk about it in that term, but also sometimes I feel like it's the opposite, like getting a lower frequency and like
to get
slowing yourself down is a way that you can kind of get there when you like turn off the things around you, and really when you're very calm and very receptive, and that's how you can ultimately do it, which is kind of feels more like a slower wavelength.
And this would speak towards the traditions of like meditation and prayer.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like if you have like really dense objects, they're like it's everything's clustered tight together, and it's like a jumbly. That's like a higher frequency, I feel like. Whereas lower would be like out in space, thin space,
Where I kind of see you as a bit of a scholar. I know you've got stacks of books, you're proud of your library, you're kind of into the esoteric, hermetic traditions.
Definitely.
Can you explain some of that stuff? I've just recently dipped my toes into these waters as I started to understand some of the language behind some of these like spiritual traditions.
Yeah, definitely. I think, part of my like thesis I've been working on and is kind of the idea that in a very ancient time, basically around like 12,000 years ago or so, was kind of an important time on the earth, I think. And at that point, I feel like there was a very high degree of advanced knowledge in very sophisticated cultures that were spread all over the world and ended up kind of being cut off from each other in the end of the last ice age, when there was a lot of upheaval and sea levels were changing. And I think at that time there was basically, as far as the Eastern world is concerned, it seemed like there is a major hub of knowledge in Egypt and in the Far East too, like ancient Buddhism and Hinduism. The Vedas kind of show like a matching level of learning between these different, and very down to the details, specifically like correlations between those cultures, where it seems like, and including the Americas as well, where it's similar techniques to cutting stone, similar ideas about where to place pyramids and temples, just the idea of building pyramids.
That's a great mystery.
Yeah, definitely is. But also about knowledge of what the soul is and where you can go after you die. And also knowledge of the stars, advanced knowledge of the stars and their precise movements, and a very extremely slow moving cycles of time, how we move around and how it affects the ages of humankind. The big thing they talk about a lot in correlation with culture and the stars is how we have, like in Hinduism, the yugas, the ups and downs of like golden age to dark age and back up again. And the Mayan long count calendar also reflects basically the same cycle. It seems they're both talking about the precessional cycle of the Earth's axis that wobbles backwards, kind of like a top that wobbles. So our axis ends up pointing to different signs in the zodiac and staying in each sign for a little over 2,000 years, and then making a complete cycle going around backwards over the course of about 26,000 years.
Okay.
25 something. So a lot of them talk about like having knowledge of that cycle and that it affects how we go up and down in our cultures and how we become wiser and stupider, and it's not an ascent up to like
right. So it's just cycles. Things are cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
So you think that I'm sure this is all based on a lot of research you've done on your own, that like the stages of where we're at in the precession of the tilt of the earth, tilt and wobble of the earth, those will affect humanity. Is that safe to say?
Well, it seems that like a lot of the cultures that knew about that cycle tried to show that they knew about it and show that they knew the length of it in like exact, precise, almost perfect,
scientific
like,
rigor.
Yeah, like you have like stone set up in Egypt that basically end up proving that they knew exactly the extent of that entire cycle,
right,
which took 26,000 years roughly, which means they must have seen most of it happen with like very precise measurements, being able to tell exactly where the stars are moving. The cycle, you'd only see the sky move 1 degree over the course of 72 years, which is more than the lifespan of a lot of those ages.
Right, so we're tracking it for generations.
So, yeah, you'd have to have a really advanced system put in place that was multi-generational, and I mean, you're talking about something in place for 26,000 years or more. Like, really, to know exactly what the extremes are, you might have to watch it 2 or 3 times through.
But I mean, I could see someone picking that apart. Just modern science, we haven't watched a lot of these things, but we could probably say with some level of certainty that we could, we've got this cycle, we can extrapolate forward. But I think it is fascinating. But you're friends with John Anthony West, the Egyptologist, who's a bit of a heretic in his age.
Yeah, he's put his mark on the world for sure, and definitely helped people to understand this. He actually did some work looking at their original chronologies of the Egyptians, which do say that there's, at least I think it was Herodotus who said it was like, it had lived there twice where the sun now set and once where the sun now rose, or something. Some kind of passage that was referencing the precessional cycle, they thought, and would have meant that the Egyptian culture would have been there something like 36,000 years in Egypt, or some kind of culture, some presence there. And their tables and their own timetables and chronologies of their history, they say there is something, a lot of it has fragments missing and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's somewhere between 36,000 years, they say.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
People have been there.
Modern agriculture is like 10,000 years old, they say, but they did discover Göbekli Tepe, and I think that's 14,000 years old.
Göbekli Tepe, is, they say it's at least like 17 or 18,000, I think, these days, but they're still digging. They haven't uncovered.
And that was fairly advanced technology.
Extremely, yeah. They're calling it the world's first temple, and it was deliberately buried right around 17 or 18,000 years ago, I think.
It couldn't have been like a natural disaster happening all at once. Yeah. But it seemed as if it was... No,
as if it was like tediously buried in order to preserve it through ages. Okay. It seems like that would be the reason. Because it's kind of like an ark as well. It has all these animals carved on it, so you can see what kind of wildlife was alive there. It's like a kind of marker.
But not only that, almost plays into like the mythology, biblical mythology, Old Testament
very
stuff.
Much, yeah. And it could definitely prove a lot of things that we don't. There's a lot of discrepancies about. Still, it could shed a lot of light on all this stuff, because there's barely anything preserved from that age. And when John when John West in the 80s had proved that the Sphinx was, at least 3 times older, saying it was from probably more like 10,500 BC, if not even earlier, instead of 2,500 or 2,700 BC. So saying it was 12,000 years old rather than 4,500 years old is, he pushed it back, and he did that by bringing attention to the water weathering on the base and the courtyard. But
he got laughed out of the room, essentially.
He was obstructed by people that were just afraid to admit that he was right, and were afraid that their livelihood, they would just look like fools. And he was like, not a scholar, not, wasn't a graduate of anything. Right. He just came in and noticed this, said, this is clearly precipitation-based weathering, and there hasn't been precipitation here for, since at least, 6,000 BC or something like that, I think. But when he brought Robert Schoch on, who is
geologist, right?
Yeah, from Harvard, and had his PhD, and did a real legit kind of took a look at it, and definitely agreed with him, and they were able to make a really big deal happen because everyone could tell they're onto something. It was often thought that those monuments were much older. So finding geological evidence was a huge, huge deal, and he did get a lot of attention. But what they got very often, he was facing people who were just saying, well, if there was advanced cultures, 12,000 years ago, we'd find
so much evidence,
all kinds of marks of their civilization. Which isn't really true, because a lot of these spots where civilization gathers, it gets built over and it just gets recycled, reused. And things that are 17,000, 18,000 years old, there's no... unless they're built like pyramids, unless they're stones that are locked into each other by some miraculous process that we barely grasp still, I think we can put together a decent idea of how it was done at this point, but we can't reproduce it, or we can't...
Plus it's well known that people tend to live close to water.
Yeah, you're going to be on the coast, you're going to be on the rivers.
Washed away or buried. I know people are looking for it. Tell me what you know about the lore of the lost city of Atlantis. I'm always interested in that. That's considered an old civilization that was referenced in a lot of mythology. Wasn't Plato talking about it?
Yeah, Plato is the most utilized example, I guess, because he was the philosophical scholar of one of the most advanced cultures in our history, and we trust him so blindly for anything scientific, or, he was helping invent democracy, and, he's just a genius in every way. And then when he brings out this story about Atlantis, people are like, oh.
That's just mythology.
And I'm sure in his account, there may be other things being said in there besides and it might not even be history, I don't know, but for people to say it's definitely, he's just making this up, or this is his dream, there's a lot of details about it, and it was it came to him from a student, where he was recording a student telling it to Aristotle, I believe, and this story had come from Solon a couple generations earlier, who's a Greek statesman, helped cancel all the debts, was a Bernie Sanders kind of really
You're getting rid of debt?
Yeah, he was just trying to really free Greece from debt slavery and the kind of system it was locked in, and he ended up becoming a really successful king or whatever, but ended up the nobility of the area didn't really like him, because that's the alt-right, or not the alt-right, but
if we're going to modern analogies,
class. It's the billionaire class being oh, we don't like him, he's making it fair for everyone. So he ended up leaving and going to Egypt, where he finally found some of the priests that were still left there. He said that lands were ancient. They had no idea who had originally built the monument, especially the pyramids, and they were just like, you Greeks are children, you don't really understand how far back this history goes.
The deep history.
Yeah, and so they like took him down beneath where the Nile goes underground to an island that had these 2 giant pillars with all the laws of the world written upon them, where they're like impervious to flood or fire or rust or anything, made out of this special kind of metal, I guess, as the story goes. But they told them all about Atlantis and said that, that's kind of gave them the whole account that we basically have written down by Plato. So as the story goes, it was told to Solon as a historical account, and whatever he got from there. But it's definitely not standing alone as evidence that there was an actual continent, but more than that, a culture that had a central location, but was also present around the world. And as the story goes, as I say that, I mean across all the things I've read on different subjects, the broad agreement of most people's research on this and things like that. In my view of the story, I should say, it's that there was a great cataclysm. You know, this is somewhere around at the end of the last ice age, when apparently there's a lot of Atlantean immigrants coming to Egypt, and around the time when I believe the pyramids and the Sphinx were built, around 10,500 BC, most likely, is a time marking that like horrific period in the earth where we had all this wisdom, we were wise, and then it was utilized in a bad way. You know, there's always, the flood stories go hand in hand with Atlantis, because it's all saying that in some way mankind angered the gods and did something wrong, you know. What I've heard was it was some Atlantean, like, priesthood members became kind of greedy and self-interested and ended up, like, utilizing some kind of power they shouldn't, or maybe tampering with some kind of technologies that they weren't totally understanding of, kind of like we do today.
Yeah.
And potentially that may have been what caused the rift in the Bermuda Triangle today, that there's a rip there because of some catastrophe. But one way or another, a lot of the priesthood, apparently, in the central leadership of Atlantis were, at some point before, and as it approached, just as a last resort as well, kind of shipped off and went around to different cultures, different continents across the world, to preserve their culture, because they saw the impending catastrophe that was going to, sink the island underwater, or whatever happened.
Climate change.
Yeah, kind of. It was this period of about 1,000 years, right then, like 11,000 years ago or so, when there's just like massive extinctions across the whole planet. Sea level rose probably 300 feet in some areas. The land sunk. The ocean became shallower and muddier in the Atlantic, they said, or in the Mediterranean as well. And navigation couldn't really get out from Europe, and so kind of get this picture of like a world already connected and like self-aware in 12,000 years ago, that was destroyed, and then it was like then we had to work back up from the bottom in order to get the new age of exploration so many thousands of years later. And there's a lot of evidence too in maps and things from that era that show that a lot of cultures did maintain records that went back to a time when the world was kind of interconnected in a way. Like cultures were interconnected. Like you'd be aware of Japan,
okay,
from America. You'd know.
Like what we are today. Probably took till like,
not quite internet level, maybe, right, but maybe, we don't know.
there is evidence of a meteorite causing some of that ocean rise at that time frame. There's like little micro diamonds. There's like a little layer kind of across the planet, and that's caused by heavy impact. And almost like an atom bomb, how they'll find like micro diamonds and glass created from the impacts of that. They found like a thin layer of that in different sites, geologic sites across the Earth. So they're thinking meteor impact. All these went up into the atmosphere and settled down, slowly deposited as this like thin band in the geology.
Yeah, I know.
That stuff's interesting.
Graham Hancock was talking a lot about the comet that or meteorite that he suspected was kind of one of the causes of this. Like, it was kind of a very quick end of the Ice Age, and that's when like all these catastrophes seem to have happened. And he, I think he was kind of saying that a meteorite that hit in North America may have been the catalyst of that quick thaw that ended up killing, the
mass extinctions and
sea level would rise all at once. You got tsunamis and earthquakes and
how'd you get into all this stuff? Usually there's like an event or a book or something that just kind of turns you on to a different way of thinking.
I got into this mostly through John, actually, meeting John West. Because, in high school, he and his daughter and I were dating for a year. Okay. And that's when I ended up meeting him and learning about his work he was doing.
You see, like, his library and all pictures from Egypt.
His beautiful, beautiful library, his little house. He's gone on trips to Egypt and let me house it, watch his dog while he was gone when the whole family went together. The whole family is just a wonderful family. But yeah, getting to spend some time there and look through his archives of books is pretty amazing. And his work, The Serpent in the Sky, that he first wrote about the Sphinx, The Case for Astrology, which is another really good book.
Tell me about that. I'm interested.
He has several books.
The Case for Astrology. There's some people around here hanging out with that are into astrology, and then kind of the thinking is, there's a very small fraction of what we're aware of. That'd be like our egoic self, like maybe 10% of what we're aware of. I'm Nate. I'm a graduate of so-and-so school. I work here. And then there's 90% below the surface. That'd be like the unconscious. And those types of things can be affected by astrological
astrology is pretty central to it all, and I think that's what led John into it, through writing a book about astrology and showing how wild it is that somehow these like images and pictographs and these symbols that we're using for these different segments of the universe have been intact since like the beginning of history, of the written language, of anything. These were present in Egypt and across, in Egypt, they would, in the age that they were in, they would worship that god ruling through the sun. So when they were when they were worshiping, I think it went from the bull to the ram. They stopped worshiping a bull and started worshiping the ram. So it was like the bull of Montu, or I forget. And then when it switched from the age of Taurus into Aries, they started worshiping Amun-Ra, or they both had names actually that represented that animal ruling through the sun. So it's when the sun ends up rising in front of that constellation, that age that they're in, they would worship it. The same with like Jesus, when he said he was like the herald of the new age, and he was at the dawn of the age of Pisces by that. And so he's a fish. And all his imagery is fishisms. And
it's been 2,000 years. Where are we at now? We got to be coming
so
close.
Now we're on the cusp, leaving Pisces into Aquarius.
The dawn of the age of Aquarius.
Hence that song.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We still got some changes.
It's cool. It's a good place to be. We're moving up, I think. I think if you use the Yuga system of India, or if you look at, just that length of a cycle happening. You see this golden age off around probably the age of Leo or before it, when the Sphinx was first made. That's one of the reasons why it makes sense the Sphinx was made at 10,500 BC, because it was the dawn of the age of Leo, and the Sphinx would have been gazing directly at Leo, rising with the sun on the equinox at that point in history. Because of precession, the sky turns, so we can tell that's when he would have been most likely put there. It's also the moment when the 3 stars of Orion's belt align with the 3 pyramids at Giza as well. And the Nile also reflects the Milky Way as a whole. And there's many other pyramids that are also... It's very, very clear that that's what they were trying to do, was map stars onto the ground with pyramids. But we were talking about how astrology is incorporated in that. And I think that's pretty important, because it was central to astronomy and astrology, both the study of the movements, the science of the stars, and the study of how they affect humanity, and how we can use them to measure out these cycles that we see coming up and down within humanity. And learning that we're going through all these aspects every year and splitting it up into months, getting one of these aspects for each month. We're also doing the same thing on a much larger scale, going through these big ages that slowly teach us this one aspect, this thing like the lion, or this thing like the scorpion, this kind of that type of energy, that type of lesson is what's being taught to humanity.
There's definitely lessons being taught right now.
Mm-hmm. And if you get into the Mayan astrology as well, the Mayan calendar, that of course, it's pretty popular. Everyone knows that. Their long count, amazing,
26
long cycles, but also their calendar that works out what your birthday is, and what it's basically a zodiacal. It kind of works with the planets in our solar system. It works with the cycles of. It works within larger cycles in the long count calendar, but it counts these different cycles of aspects that rise and fall over the days. And, each day being numbered and also named. So you have one numbered day and one named day. And that combination is meant to describe you as a person. So much so that if you were born in a Mayan community, that'd be your name for your whole life. It would be like for Siakin or something. That would be mine, I think.
And they'd be so in tune with what those things mean.
Yeah.
That they'd go.
Totally. And once again, nobody knows where they got that calendar, who developed it. Because the Olmecs had the original versions, which were the mother civilization, they say, of Mexico, but who knows if it went back further than that. So across the whole world, you had from Mexico, South America, Egypt, Cambodia, like India, to Ireland, even the Druids going up there. You had an interconnected grid of this one singular knowledge that was somehow spread in the most remote times, because all these places have just marks that are undeniable of connection, of either like trade or traffic, or seas were crossed, or they flew through the air, or something was going on there, because there was this same knowledge. Somehow it didn't develop in each one of these places independently. It's far too similar, and that would mean that every single one of these cultures would have had to have these instruments measuring the sky for tens of thousands of years maybe. But it's just, there's no, it couldn't possibly be coincidence.
You've heard of the Ra expeditions? Thor Heyerdahl, he was an anthropologist out of somewhere in Europe, I forget where, but he had a theory. He read some accounts from Mexico that there were some like red bearded visitors, and he had a theory that Egyptians visited, like the Mayans, taught them how to build the pyramids, and the thinking then is they didn't have the technology to cross the ocean, so he, gathered up the resources, got backing from the whatever scientific community, and they built a boat out of grass. Like they made these grass tubes,
reed boats,
and like weaved them together. Yeah, these reed boats.
I've seen some of those in Bolivia actually.
Nice.
Like almost the same technique. Graham Hancock talks about how they might have been connected to the Egyptian
Yeah, that's true.
Same look with like the
like curved up bow.
Yeah.
Well, he did it. He built a big ship, kind of preserved food the way they would have preserved food back then, and caught the currents, and they ended up in the Caribbean.
Huh. Yeah, Manly Hall said that some of the early like Ptolemies had ships that had fruit orchards and stocked ponds on them.
Really?
That there was like you could stay on the ocean indefinitely if you wanted on some of these.
So they had
boats.
trees. That makes sense.
Yeah, and they've been finding ships in Egypt too. There's a bunch of ships that were buried in the sand as well. Maybe like intentionally just to show that they had a fleet,
right.
Because we're not going to find these things. We're finding more and more ruins under the oceans too, which is more and more evidence saying there's so many areas that could have just been, when sea level rose 300 feet, that could have been 75% of the world's cities gone. And, they may all be right off our coasts in shallow water too. There's definitely a lot to find like that out there.
They'd probably be by rivers, the mouths of rivers and the ocean where those meet. It'd be covered with sediment by now.
Definitely, yeah. I think there's a lot of good places where we could be looking too.
Let's go back to some of this lost wisdom. It's not all astrological.
No.
A lot of like spiritual traditions, a lot of mathematics, arithmetic. Speak about the Library of Alexandria. That was was that the one that got?
That was
destroyed.
kind of after the after I would say that there was these two hubs of ancient wisdom, India basically and Egypt, and the Fertile Crescent, Babylonia, all in there. Eventually that all boiled down to Alexandria, and it seemed, because this is kind of following the processional age too, and like the golden age to dark age thing. If you imagine like 12,000 years ago about being a golden age, or seen before that, then it would be a decline all the way down from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Rome, from Rome to modern Europe, to Christianity, the Dark Ages and barbarism. That is the lowest point in the Yuga system. That's the bottom of the Kali Yuga, and then at that point you start curving back up.
Okay.
And you can see that reflected in the cultures too. Greece copied Egypt. They couldn't make sculptures as perfectly. They copied their pantheon of gods. I mean, I think they were concurrent for a long time as well. They were shared, but they had their own versions of things, and their ages tended to drop. And that's the thing about Egypt that John talks about a lot too, is that the height of their sophistication seems to have occurred at the beginning, and there's not
any... the peak of the Yuga cycle.
It's like the earliest stuff we can possibly find is the most gargantuan, most perfectly formed stones, and the most incredible temples, and most incredible vases that we can't even make. Like
that's
just
true.
Things.
They have like a perfect stone vase. It's perfectly hollowed out in the center. They have no idea how they could do it.
Yeah, they definitely had some kind of technology that dealt with matter manipulation and being able to materialize and dematerialize almost, it seems. And I think that sounds kind of far out, but I think it's pretty simple, where all you really have to do is convince a particle to turn to its waveform, and it won't have mass anymore. It won't be matter. And I think that's kind of that's one of the key technologies that is a clear mark that this one singular kind of wisdom was at all these different places around the world. But in Egypt, of course, you can see it there with the way these things were built. It almost seems like the same technology as like the Philadelphia experiment, which is like the U.S. government's military operation that you kind of use the same technology kind of thing, where you're ending up tuning something out of this frequency, and if you can control that, then you could balance its mass with the air. You could lift massive stones, you could shape them, you could cut them with ease, you could make them soft like clay, you could set them onto a big wall like in the Amazon, where you have these jigsaw shaped walls. People don't know how they possibly could have gotten them so snug together. But if they were, you know, softened, dematerialized in a way, and set into each other until they came back, they would snug themselves up. They'd be like soft and like mortar, and then it would just form to its own edge. It's crazy. You can kind of see a lot of kind of like drip like excess kind of almost like collecting off the sides of these stones.
I've seen pictures of some of those walls in like Peru.
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive.
Quite interesting.
I don't know how you
especially Sacsayhuaman. I was standing there. Their stone's bigger than the room we're in right now, which you can't hear on the radio.
Yeah.
But
10 by 12 foot cabin.
They're stones, 20 feet tall, and like...
And they're just perfectly fit together.
They're just stuck into a wall perfectly, precisely.
For some of those scenes, you can't even like fit a piece of paper into.
Not
they're
even
so
razor
precise.
blades.
Really?
Like, not even a pin, not even a needle. It's unreal. It's like, and why would you go to that lengths to do that? Unless you really knew that this had to traverse thousands and thousands of years. If people in the future were to ever understand that there was once this technology here before, I think a lot of these monuments, that this singular kind of culture of the world back then ended up trying to do was kind of leaving time capsules in a way. That was like one major function of all these temples, where like in Egypt, in India, they all have these lessons and paintings and reliefs carved all over them. They're actually books. They're direct messages being sent through eternity. That's the whole part of immortality and making something. It's so important to them for some reason to let us know 12,000 years later that once we were this smart before, and once we weren't worried about Donald Trump and like, you know, French fries and Viagra, and you know, it's like we were trying to, you know, rebuild the stars upon the ground in these like energetic mounds and prisms that are gonna like, you know, help us ascend and purify our souls, and maybe like
speaks to a different level of
state.
Yeah.
So it's like
speaks to a different level of wisdom if your entire society is like built around the ascension of your soul.
Yeah, in Trump's America, it's just hard for us to even gauge how far beyond us they were then, and it's hard for humans today to allow for the fact that any of these primitives, prehistoric people might have been even anywhere near as complex as us or thought about. But I mean, how long have we had logic and like self-knowledge and the ability to reason, you know?
I would say
we'll have a tool just as quick.
Yeah.
A city soon after. And, you know, those things don't last. They get crumbled, they get recycled. Can't imagine how much of the history of the land of Mexico is buried under Mexico City.
Right.
Like,
if it's all cycles, though, it's not really leading anywhere in particular. Like, does humanity have a destiny? Is that
well, I think you've got
is that how we have to be looking, playing the long game? I know artists speak to this is a quote from Terence McKenna, if the artists can't find the way, the way can't be found. Like, it's up to artists to be like, there's a better way.
Yeah.
There's a better way to be. There's a better way to live life. And I think art, if it comes out from you authentically, that's just like a message from spirit, essentially.
Yeah. I kind of feel like that Yeah, it's a really good question about, like, if this is all cycles, then where is it going to? Because is there anything changing or moving?
Yeah, if it's
and
just
really,
destined to repeat.
Yeah.
Then what's the...
I think that's a really good question. I think it's like, because I think there's, humanity as a whole will always go up and down, and that's part of our sleep and wake kind of thing. Everything, especially in the Hindu, is creation, birth, life, death, rebirth. It has to go through that whole wavelength process. That's just how everything works. But at the same time, it's not just up and down. It could be up and around. And the thing is, that process may be an eternal, immutable process, the up and down of culture changing. But each time something else does happen, and sometimes as it's happening, this thing that we call life is working its way, using that eternal process as a means of coming up through that into, ultimately above where we are now, where time doesn't even look like the way it does. That is just a loop that we are meant to work ourselves out of. And once we do, then someone else will come up from the bottom and keep working up through it, and we'll keep building,
lifting everyone up out of the dark ages.
That's kind of a hard concept to say just right. But I think the Theosophists say it right. Helena Blavatsky is one of my favorites. I know I've talked to you a lot about her.
Explain who she is.
She, well, before I lose a thought, I'd just say how she described that was that, well, no, I guess it wasn't exactly her, but she was the founder of the Theosophical Society, and that brought together a lot of great minds in the late 1800s that all kind of spoke on these things profoundly and scientifically, and very, very powerful information. And they were kind of, I think one of the women that was associated with that, Maybelle Collins, was very gifted, clairvoyant, had this like visual understanding of things that most people can't see, and used that to kind of describe things. The way she talked about souls and like spirit material, spirit energy, soul material, it just seems to me like this kind of substance. I often, like, in my mind, associate it with the water cycle, like something that is ultimately all from a single source. It's all from a single universal soul, mind, Godhead, whatever you'll have it, the seed, God, whatever you want to call it, the universe. That thing is the source, and then it precipitates outwards as raindrops or something, and then where each a raindrop, or a raindrop lands, first it's a stone, then it's a mineral, it works its way from that, and then it's a plant, and then it's an animal, and it works through these different stages, and no stage is more or less important than any other, but they're all just parts of this process. It starts developing, it starts gathering experiences. Once it has senses, it starts experiencing those experiences in a whole new way.
Starts experiencing itself.
Yeah, and it works its way through these things. And then, I do the, I think it works its way up in complexity, and then you have these animals that are capable of movement and motion. They're aware of themselves, they're aware of their environment, and without being humanist or saying like humans are the most important, but the fact is, I think there's something very unique about the human condition, is that you have a very good chance of being able to move out of this density once you reach the level of a human's ability to reason and the ability to learn what you're doing to yourself, and how you can actually advance on that route, how you can actually need less and live more abundantly, learn how to weave this material into a kind of unified entity that is capable then of reincarnating into another body. And then once you've consolidated that material, once you have an actual soul, which is what I would say is like this kind of life material that's flowing through all this is condensed into a single thing, then it can move from a body to another body without dissipating back into the ocean, you know, of all spirit that's everywhere. But I think that's something, maybe other animals can do that as well. But Mabel Collins, going back to that, she wrote a book called One Life, One Law. Had a lot of images that stuck in my head forever. And she was another of the Theosophical writers. She talked about like how animals might have collective soul reservoirs oftentimes. Like you have a tribe of wild horses living together. She gave an illustration of having a bucket of water and saying the water is this spirit medium that could be ladled out with a ladle, and a new horse is born, so they pour a ladle of the water into the horse. That's its soul, its spirit. But when it dies, all of its experiences it's had that life have tainted the water its own color. It's given it new spunk, spice, whatever, its own flavor, and then it's dumped back into the bucket. And then another horse is ladled out from the bucket. So every single horse that's born out of it has a slightly different makeup, but it's all basically one life for the whole tribe.
To the ascension. And I know, like the Sioux Nation, they would speak of animals as like the Coyote Nation or the Buffalo Nation.
Yeah, Oyate. That means nation. Yeah.
And also in the
Oyate.
Shamanic traditions, when they go travel to the lower middle worlds, they're speaking to the spirit of one animal. So that kind of, like, if you're talking to a jaguar, that's not just one jaguar, that's like all jaguar. So maybe connecting with that collective unconscious.
That's getting into the mentality of the hieroglyphs and the inner principles of things, the things that, like, whatever makes a jaguar, or whatever makes a scarab beetle. It rolls its own ball of dung and puts its eggs in there and is birthed from its own waste. It's a complete cycle, so it's eternal. That's its characteristic. It's like it's a microcosm feeding itself eternally. It's its own complete universe. That's why the Egyptians loved the idea of it. Or as serpent, it has no arms or legs, so it's like disconnected from touch, from feel. It's like how you feel when you see that animal, you know. What is it about that animal that makes it that? And that's when you start thinking about the world in that way, you can start to realize there's an inner quality of things that is present between all of them. When you see a deer, you can see all deer in the world. In a way, you start to realize that when it comes down to it, even if these are like different soul reservoirs, like say all the deer that lived around here were part of one bucket, you know, all ladled out. Eventually the bucket gets dumped back into the bathtub, and then the bathtub gets dumped back into the swimming pool, and the swimming pool into the pond into the ocean. And it's like, really, if you start thinking about it that way, you realize there must just be ultimately one single life in the universe, and we're all part of the same life.
It's the Godhead.
We all leave it. We go through all these journeys to like evaporate back up after we're rained out, and you know, we go through this whole escape and return, and we recolor the great Godhead soul of everything when we bring back new experience, when we come back through these cycles of incarnation, and when we develop ourselves to basically become our own become gods ourselves in a way, become where we are the creators of everything that is going on around us. And when we're capable of handling that responsibility, when we're capable of, you know, creating whatever we want,
wielding that power, ideally in beneficial manner for everyone around you.
Yeah, that's why I feel like our world is kind of a bit befuzzled right now, because if you think about like each one of us as like being a cell in the human body, like you have all these cells in your body that each, if they don't organize with each other and do their job, your body's just not going to work. You're just going to die. You know, your liver has to do liver things, your stomach's got to do stomach things, your skin's got to do skin things. And if you think about the earth as an organism, which I do, then you realize, like, what the fuck are we doing? Because we're none of us are functioning in, you know, if we all cooperated, if we were all doing the things that, if we were all learning the lessons that this age is teaching us, if we were all working towards something better, you know, this world would be something very different. Like, what if this is like our planet's dying because all the cells are in rebellion against each other. They're all being torn up and manipulated and controlled, and I think
conflicting signals. We're told to be consumers.
Yeah, I think we have someone that's trying to steer us off the course, and by someone I mean some kind of entity, some kind of
force, or
some kind of presence that's been around for a very long time, since the beginning of all this, since the last golden age and long before, that is balancing us, that is pushing these challenges into our faces as a collective global, like, community. We have to deal with things now. We have to stand up against the Illuminati, against the bankers, against these people that are trying to just straight up take over the world and hijack this entire planet. They're trying to...
The quest for power is real.
It's like, yeah, basically the lesson we're being forced to learn right now is, like, buck up and learn how to govern yourselves, and don't give away your power to these people that are tricking you into debt slavery, that are manipulating you into becoming a consumer whore, like a robotic, droning, just consumer, you know?
Right.
Someone who's not going to fight back, someone who's has their spirit broken, their will is broken. That's what these people are trying to do to everyone in the world now. You know, some people see that, some people resist that, but you have to acknowledge that it's there. That's we're being fed these lessons as if we're like going through grades in high school, and it's like right now we need to learn how to take responsibility for what's going on. We need to recognize the fact that we're creating this reality and that it really sucks. It's like really destroying itself and eating itself. And
it's destructive
so
to
many
the
better
humans.
ways.
It's destructive to the human spirit. It's like not designed for humans, other than to be consumers, which that's a very minute facet of what we are, and that's just making us comfortable on the material plane, whereas if we are spiritual beings, there's so many other things to speak to.
True. And I know you're a fan of Joseph Campbell. I think it was something he said, that mankind suffers from a symbolic deficiency. And speaking on how we don't have a collective mythology like Rome had or like Greece had, you know, we don't have these characters that unite these principles with these beings in this mythical world. All we really have in that way is dreams. So we have this kind of personal language of mythology, and that can speak to us through dreams. It's where we can tap into our more intuitive understanding of what we're supposed to be working on, what challenges we're supposed to be facing, or how to deal with them. So we have only that.
I think we do have a mythology, and I think it's slowly becoming unearthed.
Game of Thrones?
No, I mean, that might work for certain.
Sorry.
I think if we speak to the fact that we are like animals and go back to like the primal wisdom, okay, what do we need to be healthy and whole? There's a certain diet, certain foods. We need sleep. We need rest. We shouldn't feel bad that maybe I might need to sleep 9 hours one night to be healthy the next day. For instead of feeling guilty about sleeping that long. I think that's the language we need to go to eventually. Like honor our roots instead of feeling this collective guilt. Which I think in America for sure we have an unhealthy like relationship with work. Which comes from like our puritanical background. Yeah,
I know we've been talking about that a bit. I've been saying how it's really making me angry just to see everyone in this country always feeling like they're like everyone's just struggling to work. Everyone's struggling to work for someone else. Everyone's struggling to do this meaningless, mindless shit. They're just like struggling over jobs that we don't need to be doing. And as things become more automated, they're getting angry and more stressed. There's like, oh, there's no more work to do. That should be uplifting humanity. That should be less work for us to do.
Freeing us up for like spiritual
be like one
practice.
dude who invented a robot is now going to have $80 bazillion, and everyone else is out of a job, so they can just try and eat. It's wrong that people feel like they should be giving away most of their waking lives to someone else. That's not what life is supposed to be like, you know?
Yeah.
If anything, you should be spending that time gardening your own food and being sustainable rather than let's just make 50 people vastly rich beyond anyone else in the world and everyone else can just suck it. Like
there's the Western philosophy would say the individual is prime example, and you infuse a little bit of Ayn Randian philosophy in with it, then if one guy makes billions and billions of dollars, and then it's his right, he earned it, it's his right to be able to manipulate society to his advantage, because that's...
Yeah, well,
how can you take that away from an individual? That's what freedom is, and we live in a free nation.
Supposedly. I think the other night we were talking about that too, and said, honestly, look at them. They're winning capitalism. They're doing capitalism right. That's how capitalism is built.
Yeah,
that is winning in capitalism. That's what the system is encouraging.
Right.
That's like, you're doing good. Okay, you've made enough money where you can buy the rest of society.
You control the banking structure. You control...
on the banks.
The pace of life. This is one thing I've been playing around with. It's not just one person, but just kind of the momentum of the industrial age moving outward is the tempo and the pace of life. It's like picking up. People are stressed. People, like when I'm working full time, there's like no time to like hardly any time to like cook dinner or eat healthy for myself.
Yeah, I mean technology, discoveries, these things are happening so much more quickly now. Every single aspect of our culture is just skyrocketing in ways, and we've learned more, created more, destroyed more, invented more, and killed more in the past year, than 10,000 years ago or whatever it might have taken. Well, I don't know, if we were in our age then, but we're just skyrocketing towards like this, oh, whatever, drink up all the oil. Don't worry, do it before everyone gets it together to stop us from doing it. Let's frack this whole world. We can make a few extra bucks even if we poison all the water of the United States. Like, everyone's making mad grabs for power, for money, and the system that we chose to put in place here is encouraging people to do that. That's what, like we're saying too. It's not, the system's not broken. It was built this way.
This is just how it works. What do you think the Dakota Access Pipeline represented? I mean, it was deeply symbolic. It wasn't just one single pipeline that they were fighting, and there's thousands being built all over.
Yeah, the Apple.
Yeah, the Dapple. You went out.
Yeah. Last year when I was working out here, I ended up going out right after, and it was pretty wild. Quite a scene. And yeah, I do think it's tied to all this also, because I think the Lakota, I've personally had experiences with in the past too, and feel pretty connected. I'm not native by blood or anything, but also I've just read recently that the term Lakota actually doesn't necessarily mean by blood that you are one of the tribe, but that you are somebody that prays with the pipe, and the pipe is the connection to the spirit world for them. It was, there's beautiful legend about where it came from and everything. Very powerful, the most sacred object to them. And I think that the Dakota and Nakota, all the tribes of the Dakotas and all the native tribes of America to some degree are still in possession of a somewhat less dirtied version of this original wisdom that was spread around the world that I keep referring to, which I think you can even in the Black Hills the Lakota use the Black Hills as pyramids in a way, as mounds. They believe they're a very, very sacred site, and that a lot of these different peaks of the Black Hills represent different stars. They would go to different peaks to do ceremonies devoted to those different stars at different times of the year. Things like that. A connection of the sky to the ground, into a deep understanding of the stars and connection to them. And of course to the spirit world, or Wakantanka, this, the great sacred spirit of everything that's everywhere. Very connected to the essences of things, just like the Egyptians, just like everyone else we're talking about. Seeing the inner aspects of things, I guess, is what I mean, and appreciating that we are all one life. The entire philosophy of the Lakota can be summarized in just the single phrase, Mitakoi Oyasin, which means we are all related, or it means like to all my relations. It means we are just one life on this planet. It's kind of, in modern equivalents, you have the Gaia theory, which is like kind of what I was describing, the theory that
Earth is an organism.
The Earth is weird part of that organism. The Earth is part of our solar organism, and this whole universe is an organism.
We are the cancer growing.
Yeah, it's all shared life. But anyway, we were getting into the dapple, and that's definitely a huge just coming together of these issues that our country is having.
Yeah, these things are kind of bubbling. And it's so much deeper than just this pipeline.
For me, it was very, very close to heart, because it was, I've done sweat lodges for years back home in Woodstock, New York, where I'm from, and that's been a huge part of my life. Just realizing, after studying all these religions around the world, finding the Lakota tradition is so simple, so beautiful, just like really putting things out there the way they are. When you pray, you're making a sacrifice as well, which is definitely true of the Sundance ceremony that I also got to go to a few years ago, before Standing Rock. So all these things really hit me really hard. I've totally adopted their way of thinking, way of believing, way of praying, and understanding how your intention is creating what's going on around you, how to give of yourself in order to ask for something back, how to talk to the stones, recognize that the stones are part of this life, that the water in the sweat lodge, you have all the four elements. You have the hot air, the fire, the earth, which is the stones, and the water being poured on them. You're using all the elements to connect with all the elements, kind of in the womb of Mother Nature, which is the dark sweat lodge.
It's profound.
Yeah, it's very, very beautifully put. Just let's look at all the things that are running, this reality we're in. Let's look at all the aspects that have power here, even the invisible ones. Let's recognize them, and let's work with them. Let's be, let's take care of the land we live on, and most importantly, let's protect this last little scrap of land that we've been giving after, the most, potentially one of the greatest genocides that's ever existed on the planet in the history of the human race.
It's easy for us to say, let it go, it happened, it's over, but for them it's still very real. It's still in their collective mind on a daily basis. They're like, we've been fucked.
huge issue, because it's like, not only are we not saying sorry about what we did to you, do you guys want some power in this government? Do you want some control over what's happening on this continent now? After we haven't even swallowed our pride yet and said sorry, much less stop doing it. Now we're still poisoning this land. Even before the pipeline, when I went to the Sundance and went to the Rosebud Res in southern South Dakota, just going to native-owned supermarkets that opened up a few years earlier, where 75% of the shelves are empty. People are asking for money out front, And it's like, I'm seeing a people that were taking care of the land for generations, living on buffalo sustainably and being in a perfect balance with their environment, and now their children are eating American cheese and hot dogs and getting diabetes and having drinking problems. And this is all our fault. This is all the imperialists, the white people's fault for doing this. And yeah, not being able to say we're sorry is bad enough, but continuing the oppression against them in such extreme ways, I mean, it's just ridiculous to imagine it got to this point.
The momentum's already...
Well, the thing is, what happened, I don't know.
Get on the train, baby.
I mean, I've always known that the natives of this country, and I know that the Lakota especially, are very serious about protecting the Black Hills, and that is like the heart, you know. It's like, what does our government want with that? Why do we need to ever go there? We don't, because it's like dead land. You can't grow anything. It's the most dead scrap of land we could possibly have given them, you know, to keep. But that's the spot that they kept because it's important. I don't know why exactly. I've also heard that there were things buried there that people were intentionally trying to find, and that's why they tried to, that there was something connected with that. But the fact is, they had a reason to go there because it was going to save them some money doing this incredibly just pointless, you know. We don't need oil. We never needed oil. We never did. We have so many alternatives. It's just a disgusting thing to do. And as they're putting this through, you know, one of the most sacred lands in the whole country, it caused something that was unprecedented, and just no one ever, I mean, it was prophesied even in, they talk about the 7 generations after Sitting Bull's era and all that went down. There was a prophecy talking about a black snake that would try and cut through the land,
really?
and that would cause this major devastation, and that there would be a conflict, or, you know, I don't know if it didn't get this deep into it, maybe, but describing this thing that was going to be a challenge to be faced, and ultimately saying it was going to be probably up to the white men to make the right decision, but obviously they didn't. And but what they didn't count on is the utter unification of the First Nations of this country on a scale that's never ever been seen before.
It struck me as like a spiritual event.
Yeah, it
more
struck
so
me
than ideological.
Like, I was following it for months before I was able to get there, and I finally got there just after Thanksgiving was when everything was heating up at freezing, but, you know, building up.
Right.
Like at the first snows is when I arrived, and when I first went there, it was so shocking because I'd been following it all, but there was no way you could possibly have imagined what it was like to be there. It was like unreal. We're all in walking distance. It was crazy
over everything.
It was crazy. There was such a positive, amazing vibration of the whole camp, and then like there's this no man's land past it, and then just this whole ridge with these, you know, 25 stadium lights shining down on us, and hearing like people talking, mothers like asking who's going to raise their children after they die there, ready to die there. So many, especially the native people, were ready to die, expected to die. Especially the young kids were like ready to charge up that hill on horseback at any moment. But
speaks to the warrior culture.
Yeah, it's I mean, these people are coming in to poison the land, the last holy grail of land that has been defended for so long against such ruthless people.
Was this an eminent domain thing? Like, we're going to take this land?
Well, it was.
It's convenient.
They tried to rat it through Bismarck, which is, you know, pretty white population, and most of them were pretty snooty about us protesters being around. That was the biggest city nearby. It's where we had to go for emergency supplies or anything, and they were kind of looking down on us away, probably because most of them make their money off oil. But when they tried to rat it past there, you know, the white people made a stink, and then they decided to move it through the reservation, hoping, you know, no one's going to resist there. They're used to being, you know, just fucked with, and so obviously they were wrong about that, and, you know, it's amazing kind of what social media ended up doing to it, because it got the spotlight of the world for people to see this happening in America. It was a war zone. It was like a battle zone. As soon as I was there, I felt like I was like in a war.
Right.
And it was just the absolute culmination of everything that is righteous and fair and just and standing up for what's right in the world, versus the absolute culmination of self-righteousness and the petrodollar and mercenary armies. Like, it is good versus evil out there. I couldn't even describe how perfectly. It was like the Lord of the Rings or something. It's
I fully agree.
And I was so happy to see the coming together of the natives of this country, and seeing how, tribes that had been at odds for generations coming together, sharing campsites. All these tribes, on Flag Road, which is the central avenue, we had like over 280 flags at least from different nations of the country that
were people having
all
ceremony
come together,
like sharing peace pipe.
Oh yeah, the whole thing was ceremony. The whole thing was a prayer, and it was pretty amazing how it happened too. In the end, actually, when the permit was canceled that day, we had the biggest prayer circle that ever happened there. We all were hand in hand in a circle around the entire main camp of Ochedi, which was like the 7 council fires, the main camp. It was like we were all holding hands around Yankee Stadium or something.
Wow.
Enormous circle. And as soon as we broke apart, this lady was on her phone saying she just heard they canceled the permit, the moment we broke hands.
Really?
And then we heard it a couple more times. I went down to the Central Sacred Fire, which is where, there was always a guy kind of on the loudspeaker, kind of just narrating, talking about, making announcements. But it was also the central focus of the prayer is the sacred fires have been lit from previous sacred fires that have been lit for generations, forever, the same flame burning. And so we had 3 of them at Standing Rock, one in the main camp, one in Rosebud, and one in at Sacred Stone. But these fires were the heart of the ceremonies, kind of. And we would keep out bowls of tobacco and cedar, so you could walk up and just grab a handful and basically sit by the fire for a minute, say some prayers. You put your prayers into the tobacco, and then throw it into the fire. That's how you put your prayers into the bigger prayer that is going on there. Yeah. And
there's such power in ceremony because of those intentions. Intentions outward.
It's really, really beautiful the way that things are done in that way. And what's the point? What is a prayer if you can't give it to you don't keep prayers. Right. That's why you smoke the pipe. When you smoke the chanupa, the pipe, you exhale your prayers out with the smoke. You don't inhale the smoke even. And tobacco is used as a carrier of them in that way. Or making ties, making prayer ties, bundles of tobacco.
So what do you say to someone who is against these protests, who would simply say, I can turn the heater on in my home, and it heats my home. What's wrong with that?
Mm-hmm. Well,
because you really,
nothing. What's wrong with it is that you can do it in other ways,
that are ecologically
and that it's not sustainable. And you can only put so much of this blame on the consumer who's going to use oil to heat their home. I would never use oil to heat my home, because I know how devastating it is. I know that there's better things we can do. I know there's better ways to do it. And, my first argument to a lot of the people that are going to defend it, a lot of people come out saying it's so much safer than shipping it on trains or trucks. And it's yeah, we shouldn't be doing that either.
Keep it in the ground.
Yeah, how about we don't, this oil's taken millions and millions of years to create. It's been lubricating our earth. It's been in our, it's we're just deciding to pump it all out within a century or so, use it all up, and hope earthquakes don't get worse, and hope we don't pollute all the land.
They're experiencing earthquakes in Oklahoma now due to fracking. There's places in the East Coast that they can start their tap water on fire.
Yeah.
These are all alarming things.
And this is, when I was at Standing Rock, I met up with John Bollenbaugh, who is a whistleblower who used to work in the oil industry. And he's made some documentaries. I was helping him make his documentary here because he's been 6 years collecting footage of cover-ups. And he's been able to demonstrate that this is so much, like, it's not whether or not a spill is going to happen. Like, these pipelines are constantly leaking every day. It benefits these companies to let them leak every day. Unless they hit like 1.5% loss in pressure, they don't even have a red flag. It doesn't even, there's no alarm goes off. It just keeps leaking.
They just did all the math. Like, okay, this is
it's not worth it for them to shut it down for a day to do repairs. Right. They just let it leak, and they're allowed to let it leak. So 100 gallons there, 500 gallons there, 1 million gallons there. The spills we hear about are so massive that they can't cover them up. But there are thousands of spills, leaks every year. It's constantly just draining oil into our environment. Not just the oil, but like what's coming through Standing Rock and what went through Michigan when where he was from, and when he first became a whistleblower. When they're pumping this tar sands through, they have to thin it by using a really nasty chemical cocktail of agents that are really what cause even more destruction to people and to life, all the fish, all the animals. And people in his community ended up getting seizures and stillbirths and deformities and nasty nausea, headaches, like disgusting stuff. And then these oil companies come back and they ask him to just roll out rolled grass on fields full of like 4-foot deep petroleum and say that we cleaned it all up. You know, he could walk out into a field and be waist deep in a meadow, and he's like, look at this is oil. He's got all this footage of doing this. Definitely recommend looking up his documentary.
What's the name of that?
I think it's called Big Oil Whistleblower.
Okay.
It should be on YouTube. Again? John Bollenbaugh.
Okay.
Bolenbaughh.
Okay.
So,
you always hear that money is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
And I'm always impressed at how subtle that can be.
Yeah.
Like,
In fact, to the point where he ended up not taking any money from anyone for the past 6 years because he didn't want to have his interests mixed, and he's also turned down like $60 million or something in hush money. And has been doing it himself. It wasn't until the elders at Standing Rock said, John, we really need this movie now. And I ended up reading about him like a week before I went out, and decided I was going to try and meet him. Finally met him and went back to Michigan later, helped him with it. But I was dead set on trying to do some kind of media project to help. I really wanted to make a documentary, that would be timely and able to help before it got to court and everything. I mean, by the time I got out there, Donald Trump was already inaugurated, and so what are we really,
Right.
Everything else that they didn't expect to happen did happen there. That was amazing. The coming together of the Native community, this empowerment and this confidence boost given to the indigenous community here.
Thousands of veterans showed up. What's your take on that?
It was amazing. I helped them all set up their housing and stuff. Seeing these guys come in, they came from the other side of the war, basically. Most of them were over in Iraq, like you are, too, thinking that they were trying to do something good and something right, trying to stand up.
Thought I was helping humanity.
Yeah.
I really did.
That's what they forced you guys to think, and that's what they manipulated people to think.
School,
but suddenly it was like a lot of these light bulbs were going off. All thousands of vets coming in over like 3-4 days of standstill traffic coming into the camps. We couldn't set up spaces quick enough. It was really powerful. It was right at the same time as when the permit was canceled. I think because we were pretty scared about. Or the government was pretty scared about having all these vets here. DAPL didn't come to meet us at the bridge when we walked out there with all the vets. We went right up to the bridge. in a blizzard, like it's hard to keep your face uncovered for a few seconds.
And I know they were using like water cannons, spraying them on people in like 20 degree, below zero weather.
Yeah, that was
one of their tactics.
That was a horrible night. That was like, I was not there for that night. I got just after then. The night of November 20th was...
You were seeing the fallout of that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, afterwards, things started changing. The actions were led kind of by a different group at a certain point. And we were all doing trainings to deal with, like, direct action trainings.
So within the camp
how
itself,
to peacefully protest, how to, we had guidelines that were running the camp, we had this, some form of leadership, but I mean, leadership, there wasn't really any. It was kind of, there's the 7 council fires, which was kind of the head of the thing, but that's not really the way it works in Native communities either. Like, even the chairman, of the reservation and different positions like that are imposed into these communities by the BIA, which is the in-between our government and Native governments, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And, they kind of tend to go more by clan heads, family heads. It's like the elders are the ones that are in charge. The old guys that have seen this. And so it's basically just like, the elders, whoever they were, we tried to basically follow a code of what we all agreed this camp was about. And it's hard to keep a lot of vets from walking right up the hill and trying to face off with these guys who just be like, what the fuck's going on?
Do you think it would have been violent or just talking?
There was so many times it could have been. It's like, it's a miraculous that no one from our side ever really threw a stone. It was like, there was barely any incidents at all of anyone doing anything, and if there was like a water bottle or something someone said thrown at cops, it was probably a plant. We had all these plants from DAPL and people pretending to be protesters coming in, working for them though, really, and cutting our internet cables, lighting fires, maybe even like spreading sicknesses.
We know historically there have been cases of agent provocateurs. I think this happened with the Occupy movement. People like joined in the protest and they were wearing like military boots. And they started inciting violence, and that gave the reason for the police force to go in. Definitely. When really it was the police force that started the violence.
And people, it's amazing that they weren't able to do that. That's a great tactic. They infiltrate. They can't beat the mob, so they join them and try and guide the mob from inside. It's hard to know. It meant that all those thousands of people at the camp had to always be judging, always be like, who are you? You don't look like, nobody's...
You look like a
It was like... there was a little bit of that, because you had to be on your toes. And like when they're describing how we could go out to actions and how we get involved in that, it's like if you hear something on your radio or something that it's going on, we're going to the bridge or we're doing a prayer circle or there's a ceremony, you had to know whether or not it was like really, if it was like somebody called us to like go do something like extreme, it was like you had to use your judgment and be like, I don't think the elders called for that, like, because could be anybody could say anything.
You have to keep a cool head about you.
It was really anarchy in a way, and a golden kind of example of self-governance on the individual level, because everybody did everything they had to do. All the wood got chopped, all the food got cooked, all the water got gathered. Within our camp, it was like amazing, just a harmonious balance of everything. Everyone finding their place, what they had to do. And everyone like kind of joining in this collective prayer, this effort to help people understand what's going on there,
I know a lot of people were baffled by it. Like, well, you drove your car out to this place. That's oil.
Yeah,
you hypocrites.
Wish we didn't have to.
It's so easy to point at hypocrisy We all do it. We're instinctively looking for faults in others.
Well, whose fault is it that we don't have an alternative?
I mean,
we could have hydrogen cars. We could have had hydrogen cars instead of gasoline cars from the beginning. We could have had electric cars. We could have gone any number of routes besides oil. The only reason oil has caught on across the whole world and become such a thing we're dependent upon is because we've forced the industries to be based on oil, because people that control the oil want to control the oil. They can't control hydrogen if people could make it in their garage. Right. They can't control alcohol if you run a car off alcohol because you just have a still.
I'm sure it started like everything with good intentions. Like, oh, there's this fascinating new chemical we found. You can use it for this internal combustion engine. Suddenly you got these large monoliths, these large companies, and they're driven solely by profit. It makes sense to maybe fund anti-public transportation campaigns, design a society around the automobile. I know early on in Los Angeles there was contracts for trains, public transportation in LA, and those were bought up by some of the, I don't know if it was the auto manufacturers or the oil companies, but they just kind of let those not happen. Let's make it an auto city. It's got some of the worst congestion for driving.
Well, I feel like that, at some point it was discovered as a source of burning fuel, but also, I think we talked about this too, we might disagree a little, because I think it was even more deliberately an effort to get the world hooked on petroleum because it was limited and it was only available to those people that would get it, and it was controllable. Because otherwise, I'd heard that even Prohibition happened because they didn't want alcohol to be the fuel to run on, so they banned alcohol for as long as it took for petroleum to be chosen as like the fuel of the automotive industry.
The fuel of choice. I think
just because like everyone who has a still could make alcohol, I don't know though.
I think at this point the infrastructure of this nation is designed for automobiles and fuel in a liquid form. We've got all these storage tanks and gas stations, got all these pumps. That it just makes sense. Like the ethanol industry, the corn, putting corn, making ethanol fuel. Well,
I definitely think...
I'm not saying it's right, but there's incentives to...
I think there's at least we could be transitioning off of them, and we're pretending to, but we're not. We're trying to make it look like we are, but we're not. It's like these companies are making things that hybrids and so many of these are using harmful elements to make these parts, and it's like we have designs that can go all the way to the end of being clean and doing it slowly and as long as it takes and weaning ourselves off of oil. But I think the sad thing is that it ever got used in the first place. It's like if we didn't have a cleaner fuel than oil to use, we should have just stuck with horse and buggies until we found the cleaner fuel.
They weren't thinking in those terms back then.
Those guys don't think about the future, and that's, they think about the future in terms of...
or they just look at the bright side of it and just be like, oh, well, there's a little pollution, but we get these automobiles that can go so much faster, we can get so much more work done.
And like you're saying, capitalism, that's winning. That's doing it right. That's what you're supposed to do in this system. That's what they want you to do.
Innovation.
Thunder. But also, pulling that back around, I was thinking about Standing Rock again. I forget what.
But you felt like the prayers had power. You felt like you could feel the energy.
Definitely. There's something to the camp too, where it was, you could find whatever you needed. You could run into the person you needed to meet, very receptive kind of energy there. It was like it did feel like you were talking to the prayer of the camp. You were actually being part of it, and everyone was being very sincere. I saw a lot of good things come out of it too. Different groups, organizations. The International Indigenous Youth Renaissance was born from it. Cool group I got to work with. The MASH tent, which was a couple of my friends were starting this and hoping to go to other events in the future too, which is MASH stands for Media Artists Serving Humanity, making media projects. And one of my friends from there went to go help record on different reservations across the country and bring studio equipment to record songs and music of Native communities. The Red Warrior group that got pulled together there ended up continuing on to do some great stuff. And ultimately, I was hoping that this would end with even a Native party, an Indigenous party, and maybe a presidential candidate.
Like a unified...
Yeah, I think like Tulsi Gabbard actually has a decent shot, and she was there too. Almost got to meet her even, but
I don't know who that is.
She's I believe Native Hawaiian, but she was the Democratic vice chair of the Democratic National Committee during the elections.
Okay.
Ended up dropping out once she saw how corrupt the Democratic Party's been, and more endorsing Bernie, because
I think that was disillusioning for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and I heard that there were leaks from the Democratic convention that showed the collusion between Hillary's campaign,
for sure,
and to kind of push Bernie out. And some of those documents got leaked, and one of the people in the convention was murdered. He was shot. They said he was robbed, but nothing was taken off of his, not his wallet, his watch, none of that stuff. His phone, none of it was stolen, but he was murdered.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
it's so easy for me to insinuate that it could have been related, but also to muddy the waters and say, oh, it's just
well, this is really crash and burn status for our country here. This past election was so just ridiculous.
I hope it's a wake up. Right?
It's just like what I can't imagine how anybody has any faith in the establishment politics that have been going, and even the people that say Trump has made it different. Trump. I didn't expect Trump to win. You know, I didn't know which would be worse, because Hillary is more conniving and secret, would have done more damage to things that we aren't even thinking about, whereas Trump is causing blatant,
just chaos,
hopefully temporary damage, and but he's doing a horrible thing to this place. He's enabling these mentalities that should not be allowed to be acceptable. You know, people shouldn't be empowered being white supremacists, and I mean, they should have their right to speak and, you know, right to congregate and all that, or peacefully protest, say what they want to say, absolutely, but we can't be emboldening that mentality. And of course, I mean, I'm not even going to get into why Trump is wrong and horrible, but Hillary's just as bad too, and everyone saw that in the election too. In New York, it was disgusting. Like, I had a Bernie sign up on my lawn, it got taken down. I put another one up, it got taken down. People were stealing them from my.
So you are openly against the government, but Bernie stood for increased power of government. How do you justify that?
Increased power of government? I think he
entitlement programs.
I see Bernie as someone spending his whole life really trying to use common sense, which nobody else in the House or Senate or Congress does that, it seems. Like, just saying,
it depends what your angle. Depends what your angle is. Like, if you're a person who had to sell out and take the job they don't like, and they want to see the economy do better, so there's better jobs. It's common sense if we cut the regulations that we'll have better jobs in this country. Use your common sense, whereas you're coming from a totally different angle. You're saying,
I think
common sense to,
I think it's common sense to people deserve the rights they deserve. The civil rights movement, that's common sense. He was there. He was behind it. It's like, yeah, we're all equal. Can we figure that out already?
He strikes me as a man of great integrity.
Yeah, he hasn't flip-flopped. Hillary changes her opinions on everything every other year. I mean, Hillary, it's pretty obvious. You can just give her $1 and she'll say whatever you want her to say. That's the whole pay-for-play, her foundation. It's like, give me money and I'll do whatever you want. She's a political whore, I can say, for sure. Is what she is. And then Donald Trump is just either an idiot or already bought out, and obviously he's just destroying things. But if you imagine Hillary may have passed the TTP, the trade partnership with Europe, that would have been disastrous for our whole world for the next 30 years at least.
What were some of the implications of that? I haven't really.
Basically, these extremely secret documents being written up with such security measures that it's like you got to be watched as you're reading them. You can only read a page. It's like they're barely even showing them to anyone in politics, anyone in anywhere. It's basically corporations writing the rules for the world. And the relationships between the United States and Europe, there's 3 different agreements. There's TTP, TTIP, something else. But they basically, the American corporations could be suing Europe, for instance, for loss of future profits because of things like they don't allow GMOs in European countries. So Monsanto could sue European countries and force them to use GMOs. Things like that. And then building this infrastructure to this trade agreement, so-called trade agreement, that's really just like a commandeering the world kind of thing.
Sellout type.
It's basically a New World Order type structure, and it's like no elections. It's like nobody's elected, and you can't even change any of the people that are in these offices for at least 30 years. It's written in. And it's like, who agrees to any, like, why is it that these corporations are writing up this whole thing? Why is it that they're making themselves God and not letting anyone see, and then they're just going to try and pass it with all these countries? Hillary would have let that go through for sure.
Right.
She may have tried to change a little bit, but she would have let that happen, and our world would be on a much scarier path of something, like the EU. It's like you don't just stop the EU once it's been made, but now that's a coagulation of power that's just bound for devastation. It's like the more you clump the power together at the top, the more it's bound to topple down to the ground again. Whereas Bernie, I think, talks more about how you have to spread the power on the grassroots level, bring it down to the individuals, give the towns and communities power, give the federal government no power except for jurisdiction that has to deal with international issues and things like that.
Like between borders.
And even for that matter, for those matters, they should just be referendums down to the individuals too. We should have direct votes on any issues of national significance.
We have the technology
that's what a democracy
each person
is,
can have one vote.
Yeah, we have the technology. It's just as easy to hack or whatever as the ballots are. And right now, the wrong people are hacking all the ballots. So why not let a transparent vote take place on the internet or however?
You could use like blockchain technology, like Bitcoin, to verify.
I mean, this isn't a democracy. It's like, if this is a democracy, then George Bush could have said, okay, we got attacked. Should we invade Iraq? And everyone in the United States can say yes or no. Do you think we would have gone? I don't think so.
I would have voted yes. Because
I think a lot of people would too.
At that age.
And it's very possible we would have voted too. Probably would there. But if you give people the opportunity to take that decision in their own hands, then that is a direct democracy. And why don't we have that? Why do we get every 4 years to pick between two fools?
I fully believe that this is like a battle for democracy. What's going on in the government, these elections, everyone's seeing like, oh wait, it's not a democracy at all.
No.
I think a lot of people would put the blame on the politicians themselves and get rid of the government.
Yeah.
They're bad. Others
we
would just
really-
blame the system. Like, this is the system. This is it working exactly as it should.
If you really get into it, the United States isn't even a country. It's a company. It's a corporation.
Yeah,
itself,
I've heard. Tell me more about that. I've heard you and I've heard Bill talk about it. This seems like some deep stuff.
Yeah, some deep rabbit hole stuff. I mean, it's true. It's like what we got going on is I guess whatever story I'd heard it from was that it was Lincoln, like back in the Civil War, was trying to keep this country together, and England was basically saying that we owed them a solid debt because they put all these resources into the colonization process. So they were basically like, okay, well, you guys can govern yourselves, but you still owe us for everything that's been built there, and you owe us a massive debt.
Were we paying them back after the revolution, or was it
I don't know. I just remember the issue being that Lincoln had to convince a lot of states to basically mortgage their land to Britain and
pay for debts.
Put it on collateral to England, and the southern states were like, absolutely not, and that was actually one of the bigger causes of the war, and that Lincoln really couldn't end up doing it. There was no way he couldn't convince them to do that, and so basically, like, the United States as we knew it ended right there, and it was never a country again. The Constitution basically died right then, and what he did was just started something new. He started like basically a corporation that is what we know of as our government today, and didn't come until much later that the real rabbit hole stuff started going on, where the Federal Reserve came into existence around 1914 when all these bankers cartel met on the island, Jekyll Island, that whole story. Wrote up all the bills for that in secret, brought it to court through all these fancy people, got it passed. Now we finally had the central bank that every one of the founding fathers were against, and nobody ever wanted, because they knew it was too much power.
Everything if you manipulate the money, the currency.
And then once they got really dug their heels in and got grasped across the whole world's economy, and the gold standard was revoked in 1933, then after that it became basically that the wealth of America, without anybody realizing it, was actually the promise of the labors of the American people. And so, like, what our money was based on, the whole power behind the dollar on international markets at least, was saying, well, we have this much of a population that's going to do this much labor within their lifetimes, so that's a credit we should be owed. These people, they belong to us because they're our employees, we're the company, they're registered to us at birth, they're all going to work for us. And so from your birth certificate, you can actually find the number or use your social security number to find, you basically have a stock on your name, like a stock number that you can look up on the stock market, and it's a number within the millions of dollars for most people that represents what you're expected to be able to accomplish through your life labors. And our government, without you knowing, uses that for credit, basically, on international markets and in the monetary system, and nobody knows. Nobody has any idea that their life is just being gambled with and used, used as like a poker chip.
Yeah, this is the same argument I brought up when you told me about that the first time. Mm-hmm. My day-to-day reality that really doesn't affect my decision making at all.
Yeah.
Or it's not like someone's got a whip to my back telling me to do anything.
It doesn't feel like that to a lot of America, but a lot of America's caught up in this because they do feel that need to be working. And who are they working for? Who is our whole debt owed to in this country? Where does every single dollar in the world come from? From the Federal Reserve, who gives it as bonds, buys bonds from the government. So now they've got, however many billions of dollars worth of government bonds, and we're all basically trying to pay off our national debt. And the debt is owed to this group of scumbags that all got together and decided to be the elite rulers of the world. We don't owe them anything. We don't owe anyone anything like that. You know, they didn't do anything. They just printed money. That's not... And the whole world is trying to work to pay these people. To pay this handful of people. That's what the dollar... And bringing it all the way back around, the petroleum as well. Because the world would not still be using the dollar if they could buy petroleum with something besides dollars, which is why we had to secure the Afghani oil, all the oil of the Middle East, and Iraqi, Saudi Arabia, and that one really held us. Because then we made it so that no one could buy this oil without using dollars. So that's therefore the petrodollar is this...
petrol dollar. And I know nations like Iran are trying to get off of using the petrol dollar. And that's when a lot of politics... maneuvering and posturing.
Well, now at this point in the world, that's what I mean by like mad grab. It's like they understand that the whole rest of the world, Russia, China, the BRICS alliances everyone's done with the dollar. They know it's a scam. They know it's lasted too long. They know we need something else, and they don't know. You know, these other countries have been in the process of trying to map out what the economy of tomorrow would be without the dollar, or how to just let the dollar die out without, you know, totally screwing over all Americans that use it every day.
We will not go silent into the night.
But there are ways now, you know, and now it looks like, I think that the cryptocurrencies are amazing because of that, because we can put our faith back in one another and having democratic style creation of money, as well as sharing, distributing, and the more we buy out of dollars and into these currencies that are no less real than a dollar, they're just as imaginary.
Dollars kind of make believe.
It's the only value in a dollar is our faith in it, you know. And if our faith shifted into these digital currencies, it could actually be the basis of a global economy that would be literally democratic. And even every new piece of money made could be shared amongst everyone who's part of the system, or something to that effect. Universal income, things like that. We could just create that money out of nowhere, like the Federal Reserve has been doing forever, but it's shared amongst us all, and then we're not dependent upon them. We don't have any debts owed to them. You know, our government can figure out how to pay all the dollars into the national debt. They can give all the dollars in the world back to the Federal Reserve, and they won't be worth anything.
Yeah, that's the fear. I mean, I understand why people want to keep things the same, because at least there's stability. Like, there are times in Germany where you had to take a wheelbarrow full of dollars.
Hyperinflation.
To buy a loaf of bread, and you'd get paid like 6 times a day, because the currency the values were changing that rapidly.
Yeah.
So I see both sides of it. People say, don't change it, or maybe tweak a little bit on the edges, and keep the stability, but at the same time it seems to be serving the interests of...
Yeah. I mean, I think that the people involved in making the Federal Reserve, when they created it, knew that this would topple out at some point. It would build and build and build, and then at some point the world would realize, like, you guys can't just keep printing money. This isn't Monopoly, you know, like, this isn't a game.
Based on
it's like,
something.
You've got nothing there. What do you can't play a hand of cards like that. You don't have any cards to play. You can't keep tricking us to thinking that you are masters, you know, that the whole world is working for you.
So when I know a lot of people talk about, like, class warfare, class politics. Everyone's talking about the 1%ers, and a lot of people are disparaging of that mentality. They kind of think you should want to be one of those people. Like, that should be your whole ambition in life. That's success. But you're saying it's not necessarily the best thing. And Bernie Sanders, when he talks about billionaires, is he talking about, you know, those groups, the banking families, people that are
you're talking about
everything, or just people who are taking a lot of the resources?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a system like this where it's like ultimately everything will end up being monopolies. Every industry will end up being dominated by one company, and that one company, their interests at the very top of that company's pyramid are aligned with the interests of every other one of those monopoly conglomerations of companies. And all those CEOs, then you've got them all in a room together. They want the same things. They want the same deregulations and like getting around the EPA and the whatever obstacles they have in their field. They're talking about pharmaceuticals, food, water, money. Banking is clearly like a very central pillar to it, and the military-industrial complex, and the government. But the government's basically a small player in it, as far as I would see. But I think when you get to the peaks of any of these pyramids, at the tops of any of these companies or agencies or establishments, they're all doing this. They're all on the same page. They all want to control the world, and they all want to be rich, and they all have to join this big club. And there's lots of these clubs. There's the Council on Foreign Relations, there's the Bilderberg Group, there's the Trilateral Commission, there's the Illuminati, there's the Masons, which I think the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Masonry is maybe one of those groups where those kinds of plans are made, but that's an invite-only rite. I think most Masons are pretty oblivious to that and pretty good-hearted people, honestly. But there are these like powerful centers of individuals that these very influential, they get together in the fanciest hotels in the world, and they're literally just like, what should we do with the world this year? Like, who should we kill? Where should we move the wars to? What, whose resources where should we, and these people are just doing things that are criminally insane and like sociopathic, just like, what's it going to take? Like, how much more? You own most of the world's wealth by far, these people. And it's like, they're rich enough to have anything they want for themselves. So it goes beyond that somehow. It's like, why are you destroying the world if you've got everything you need?
The lust for power, or maybe they believe in an like antiquated idea of what things ought to be.
Yeah. I think they're just crazed at some point, or else taking orders from someone else, or working within a plan that is bigger than themselves and that has been passed down from age to age and from generation to generation, especially with certain bloodlines. And when you're getting into the Illuminati and those bloodlines that go back, you're looking at power that's been they've really been present for a very long time and had a massive degree of influence on everything that's going on as long as that's been.
I've heard of the Illuminati. Can you explain what it is? And is it verified, or is it just
well, I mean, a lot of people use it like as a blanket statement, just like the Illuminati, just to describe all these groups that, like, are these control agents. Like really, the Illuminati specifically, I think, refers to a group like out of Bavaria, southern Germany, or that kind of came up. It's basically like 12 or 13 family bloodlines that are all, or like 12 of them that are all like connected by one, I believe, that have kept this kind of, I don't know, some kind of genetic difference from the rest of humanity or something they've kept within their families. And I think that goes back to Egypt, goes back to very old times. I think there might be something different about these people. But we're talking about the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, like Kennedy, Onassis. There's all these names that are part of that, which doesn't mean that, anyone who's part of those families is evil. Right. But the Rothschilds, pretty much. I mean, the Rothschilds are very much like, when you think about how much power and influence they have compared to anyone else, it's staggering. And you have, like, the richest 8 individuals in the world own as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population. And these individuals, the Rothschilds don't have individual money. They spread their money everywhere. But if you could put together what how much their family owns through foundations, you're looking at something like 5 times the amount what those 8 or what the half of the world has. You're looking at a large percentage, like a vast majority of the world's wealth belongs to the Rothschild family alone.
And they're using it for wheeling and dealing.
They're using it to buy influence of every kind through the media, through the government, through the...
That's Machiavellian. Control the thoughts of the people through the media.
Yeah, and as far as I've understood it, the Illuminati from Germany created an alliance with a secret rite within Masonry. I'm not sure if that is the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite, but basically sometime in the 1800s they said, look, if we just follow this formula, the world will be ours. Like, we can get it all. And it seems, they've had these New World Order plans. They're part of, sparking this whole war, creating 9/11, creating these events that would spur the world into this, like, fear and anger and also complacency and, like, powerlessness, and then fuel this whole war to kind of start this surveillance culture in America, this police state, and make people more and more afraid, spread these refugees that are running from the horrors we created there, have them spread all over the world, make the whole world afraid of this threat that's now spreading across into all these other countries where people are more and more on edge about immigrants and Islam in general. We've made Islam the enemy, which they shouldn't be, and they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing because we've done things we shouldn't have done.
They're pressured, they got their backs against the wall.
I mean, we went and blew up their countries. We just murdered everyone. What do you do when somebody blows up your house and your family? It doesn't feel good. It's like that was part of the formula from the beginning. We needed to give them that anti-American sentiment. We needed to make them hate us. We needed to make us hate them. And this whole scheme to try and, like, guide our collective American mentality towards this, just like, yeah, we're America, we're the world police, we should be everywhere, we should be spreading democracy everywhere, and then, affecting the elections of all those democracies too, selectively, or not so discreetly, just murdering off what candidates we don't like, killing whatever rulers of any country that don't agree or play ball with us, and installing a new one that will. Puppet governments. Mm-hmm. That's pretty well known that America has done that, has installed governments
for sure that are amenable to our interests.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can control a country without ever raising a finger or a sword.
The IMF.
It's debt. It's the same way they control American people. They'll go there and they'll say, we'll give you this massive loan and we'll pay that loan directly to American corporations that are going to come down and build you infrastructure, a sanitation system, or whatever, electric grid. And then you'll owe us this massive money, but you'll already have paid our companies to do it, and you'll still owe it to us. And they'll have these insane interest rates that'll force companies to default so that they have to give up to America their votes in the United Nations, their resources, their forests, Panama Canal,
like
oil, whatever you want, anywhere in the world, and you can set up this invisible imperialist net, an empire. It's empire building, but very subtle, extremely effective. They can't say anything because we control them with their debt. That's how they do it to American citizens, and that's how they do it to other countries.
It's almost people of their lives.
Yeah.
Gotta play ball.
Yeah, I mean, nobody feels like they're in a cage, but they are. They feel like they owe their lives to someone else. They feel like they have to go out and make money. Why can't I just have a house and never see a dollar in my life and grow my own food and do my own thing? You're not allowed to do that.
You don't own that house, you only rent it from the government.
That's what they'd say. And you know what? I don't believe anyone owns it. I don't believe anyone owns the land. I believe in your right to have your own spot, do your own thing, have your own space, have shelter, and feel safe in there. But I don't think that means I don't think that means it's your land.
Right.
You know, that's kind of more the native way to think about it too.
There's the notion that we're just stewards.
Yeah, and like we belong
land.
to it. You know,
Yeah.
we're part of it. It's not.
It's challenging to have a worldview at odds from the culture that you live in.
Well, you can tell that the society's doing it wrong because we have like 5 broken down empty houses for every homeless person in the country. Something ridiculous like that. Like we have the space.
Right.
We have the means. We could have a population 10 times what we have right now sustainably living on this planet. You know, everyone says we're overpopulated. It's not true. We're just stupid about how we live.
Well,
you know.
that kind of speaks to freedom.
Yeah.
People don't want to be told how to live. You can't tell someone that you ought to be living this way because it's more eco-friendly. They're like, no,
Yeah.
I want to have this large pickup truck.
Yeah.
And this heated swimming
Yeah, at a
pool.
certain point it does
And
come
this-
down to that. It's like, no,
because
sorry,
you
you can't
you
have
are
that.
infringing on someone else's rights when
Yeah,
you are.
I mean, we can't kill the
taking-
planet. That's
Right.
the one rule, you know? That's the one damn rule. It's like, just don't kill the planet and we're all good. Yeah, I always thought we could have one single law in this country, which is like, cause no unnecessary harm to any being or to the environment
Right.
or to the planet. Cause no harm to anyone else. And if you think about that, how many people that are in jail would be out and how many people that are out would be in? Our whole government would be in jail. And all the 99% who are in jail now, minor drug offenses, like, you know, those things are not hurting anyone. Nobody should be closed up in a cage. And, of course, the prison system, the security systems in this country are as horrendous as they could possibly be.
It's an industry now.
It's a
all
disgusting
come down
private
to
industry
economics.
like everything else. Everything's moving towards privatization, so everything's moving towards capitalism.
You've got
Capitalism.
police lobbies paying money to keep the cannabis illegal. Because if cannabis is illegal, that ensures prisons will be more full. Which that's job security for them.
Exactly.
Which is kind of sickening to think of.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even know if you heard last year at Standing Rock was going on. We were having the world, like the country's by far largest prison riot across interstate, in 50 different prisons. We had these uprisings.
I did not hear that at all.
You didn't hear a thing
No.
about it, right? Because nobody did.
In the media.
They're in a separate world. But this was huge across all these places. These inmates are just being basically exploited for labor and horrible conditions. It's like, yeah, when everything is just aimed at making profits, you as a prison owner just want to have more and more prisoners, and you want to give them less and less food. You want to give them less and less space. If you can hold 1,000 prisoners in your spot, then you're making more money,
Right.
you know?
I mean, they get paid
Yeah.
by occupancy per bed or whatever.
And then it's like, the cops they beef each other up. It's like, oh, you need more inmates? Oh, we'll make more laws. Oh, we'll beat up more black people. Or we'll, that's what makes the cops get dumbed down and feel like, and these forcing them to have a quota or fill a quota. It's like, what if nobody is doing anything wrong? Why do you have to go harass people?
I know after...
Especially with minorities. That's goes without saying. It's just 10 times more ridiculously we should have been past this 3 centuries ago.
Right. There was some in New York City. There were some police officers that were killed. I think this is what caused it. And the police force, they decided that they were only gonna enforce laws that helped public safety. So only violent, or stop people that are committing violence. Don't worry about any of the drug peddling or anything like that. And it worked. Things were fine. definitely less force on, or less resources put into keeping law and order. And no one was dying in the streets.
I mean, if you think about the police system, I never really thought about it this way, but it just popped in my head. Like, it's kind of the same thing as the pharmaceutical industry, where it's like you create more diseases so that you can create more drugs and you can sell the whole thing. Right. But also in that, you're inflating the demand because you have the supply. But also in that it's that you're treating not the causes, but like the symptoms. You're not like in Western medicine. It's like, oh, this is wrong with you. Okay, well, take this pill, and it'll give you 5 other side effects that you don't need another pill for.
You can't sleep now.
But right. It's like that's already something's already wrong.
Like people don't have time in their busy workaday lives to do the work that it takes to be healthy in a holistic manner. And sometimes
versus like an Eastern kind of medicine,
sometimes
more preventative.
Sometimes part of what your health routine might be like lower your stress, which means I can't work 60 hours a week because I need to have time to feed myself.
Exactly. So it's kind of the same thing with the police. It's like we're not looking at what's causing the violence, what's causing the issues, what's causing the stresses that are making people be violent in the world, in cities. Like, we're just trying to, diagnose the symptoms of it and just trying, and, never getting to the roots of it. We don't need police. Like, we need, maybe we need a 100th of the amount of police we have. For every 100 police, you could probably have 1 police.
There are true like psychopaths out there.
Other things.
It's good to have
for sure
protection against that.
But that's not something that that's very rare,
Right.
And if we have infrastructure put in place for dealing with that, then that is part of the rule. That is causing harm. But if you give power and control over these situations to the grassroots, the individuals, the people themselves, and people start
communities.
Yeah, your community is really where, as far as it should go. You got a crazy person there. You as a community figure out what's wrong with this person. Figure out what they need.
Support.
Figure out how to help them not be a crazy person. You don't even have to lock them up. Try and help them.
I think people can heal from insanity. It just requires a lot of space.
But what I think is underestimated is that people expect that there are so many people like that. Really, no one is naturally gonna just break down. No one's going to be crazy. If it weren't for the world we live in. The world we live in has been built, through all these different things we've been talking about and controls, and from the media, from television to thought programming, building the public opinion, building the public mentality. We're in this mindset that is the reason for all these things that are happening. The oppression to the African American community, it clearly correlates to the high levels of violence that we see, There's
very high levels of depression in this country.
Yeah, I mean,
mental health issues are, I believe, rising.
Yeah, and who asks where that comes from?
The entire system is not designed for the human animal. It's designed for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
And the system is designed to keep you so busy that you never start thinking about that or asking. Why isn't this way?
And that's where it comes down to, an initiation of sorts. Mm-hmm. You get initiated into a different way of looking at things. And I know a lot of these Hermetic traditions have this language of this initiation. I know in Native American cultures, the initiation of the shaman was something close to a form of schizophrenia. And that person would get, all right, we're having a healer being born. This is good news. Let's get this guy to that other shaman. Yeah. And he'll be able to help him out.
Yeah. The schizophrenia is, it's in that same category there. Sometimes I think that might be possession of some sort, or it might be that they've developed another personality within themselves. I think that could be one of many things, but I think it's related because I think initiation as a that such mysterious term that's been used like all through so many cultures. What can it really mean? It must be a universal kind of thing, because sometimes it's just coming of age or like doing something that's difficult to do. But I think in that what we'd call like initiatory traditions of sharing advanced wisdom and things, when you're initiated, the idea is basically to force you to understand what you are when you don't have your body, what you are after death, what you are as a soul, what you are outside your body. Like, because you are you, but then when you die, there's just a slight difference, and your body's all of a sudden, you're not there. So you're not your body, you know? And like,
you're not what you think you are.
By process of elimination. Like, yeah, it's like there's something that was in you a second ago, and then when you're dead, it's not there anymore. Whether or not it poofs and vanishes into nothing, I don't know. But the fact is, that body that's dead there is not you.
Right.
So who are you? You know? And like, if you start walking down any of the paths of alchemy, of Hermeticism, of the Kabbalah, Sufism, any culture across the world that might have some part of that sacred doctrine that's like a continuous, or what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy, like the wisdom that rises whenever humanity needs it, through someone that is inspired, someone that can access themselves outside themselves, someone who can find themselves within, and not, I think in these systems where you'd be trained by a medicine man or a shaman, you're basically being pushed into this place where your consciousness has to grow. It has to understand what it is without its body in one form or another, whether it's being placed in the casket inside the Great Pyramid and having to report on what's going on in the distant corners of the Kingdom of Egypt or something, where you have to fly in your spirit, or remote viewing, something like that, as they call it now. To some degree, you have to experience your own death. That's what the initiation of Freemasonry is, the initiation into the ancient Egyptian mysteries, into the Greek mysteries, all these rites, doing some kind of drug and then having to traverse the underground pitch black maze in some of these rites, things like that, like sensory deprivation kind of things. A lot of these initiation ceremonies use drugs or plants, teachers.
I know one of Joseph Campbell's, something he'd mentioned frequently was that we don't have any sort of initiation rituals in our society these days. So you can have kids that are kids, remain in that child mentality their entire lives. That's this is speaking to a different level of initiation, but I think there is.
Yeah. I think that represents a certain understanding of what you are, and I think a lot of people, maybe most of the people on Earth don't even have a soul. I don't know how many people, because I would call having a soul meaning you've made it past that point in your development where you've encapsulated it, you've encased it, you've made it a thing. It's no longer this like material within the ocean. It's its own body of sorts. And once you've gotten to that point, then you can reincarnate. Then you can go into a next body, and then it might take thousands of lifetimes in human bodies to learn all these lessons, and until you're finally to the point where you don't need a body anymore. But learning to get to the point where you don't need a body anymore, that's the initiation, that's the adept, that's the shaman, the one who can leave his body, the one who knows the difference between himself and his body. Or there.
Someone who's been initiated into the mysteries.
I don't know, I think we're looking at this like distant point in our history where we knew things that I think we didn't know, that we don't know now. We're learning things now that prove that people back then were really on a genius level compared to us. They were concerned with things in a world that we don't even see. And the Egyptians are kind of like the spearhead of that whole thing, just like really embodied this whole wisdom so perfectly, and so much of it is still there that we can see this whole science, this whole system they had, and we can just see this brilliance from like what they were as a civilization, and especially living in Trump's America, where we are just pretending that we're this really advanced culture, yet we're focused on all the wrong things and none of the right things, because we're disillusioned and we're being dragged in this direction that's against the will of nature, against the will of what humanity is supposed to be doing. So I feel like there's this big pull to recognize what was known back then, to try and pull together some of this message that they sent to us, because they went clearly to great pains to be able to send these messages forth, build these monuments that would last through thousands of years, because they knew how long it would take for us to become stupid and then wise again.
Understood these things.
Yeah, like 26,000 years or so. It's like 25,900 something. I forget, but
so we owe it.
I think
these people.
I think if nothing else, we need to recognize that there's a message coming through and that it's important about our future. But it's really about all these things we've been talking about in the present, because basically if you read Plato's account of Atlantis, it reads like it was him describing our world today. Almost exactly. It's just like all these nations have gathered to get, like technology is, blasting off. We're just getting all these new discoveries, all these new ideas, forces of electricity. We're learning things, and we're just going really fast. And there's this one superpower that's kind of like at the forefront of the human race. If we were racing, I don't know where we're racing to, but it's like this America, basically, which was like Atlantis almost identically. It just sounds like Plato's describing us now, and us really about to mess up, and messing up, doing the wrong things, displeasing the gods, and we're at this another point in this cycle right now. We're going through the exact opposite point on that giant cycle of when all this stuff happened. I'm talking 10,500 BC, the dawn of the age of Leo. Now we're at the dawn of the age of Aquarius. We're exactly 13,000 years or so away from when the Sphinx and the pyramids were built, at these 2 points in the cycle that are very important, because it's when our axis turns towards or away from the center of the Milky Way. So these are kind of like the only 2 points on the cycle where you can pinpoint this is an equinox of sorts, which is like what the Mayan calendar, the 2012 date. That's like it's going to be noon at this time. It's not like something's going to happen, the sun's going to explode. It's like that's when the sun's highest in the sky. That's when you're most awake. That's when there's the most activity in the day. How time passes. It's just a peak of a cycle. It doesn't mean any one thing is going to happen necessarily. But there is a lot happening right now. It is a peak activity. It's like, we're slowly gaining ground and learning things over centuries and centuries, and now it's just racing to this point where either we're going to destroy ourselves or figure it out real soon. Figure out how to live sustainably, or destroy the planet. And the planet, I don't think, will let us destroy it. It'll probably destroy us first.
Yeah, we'll just destroy our ability to live here.
Yeah, and it is prophesied that this would be another tumultuous period, a cleansing period, and the end of a world is how the Mayans described it too. It's not the end of the world, and it's more a beginning just as much of an ending, but it is one thing's going to get wrapped up, and there's going to be a new age, a new way of doing things and thinking. And I think that's pretty apparent to me, because as much as I feel the world is sadly in the clasp and clutches of these evil sociopathic billionaires, it's also their authority's been cut out from under them. The rest of the world is done with the dollar. Like, basically, everyone knows what they've been doing, and nobody's still willing to be slaves to them for no reason. So, it's like, inevitably, over the course of the next few decades, this is just going to collapse for them. For these people that just don't know how to do anything except rule the world. And I feel bad that they probably don't even know how to plant a potato or, a strawberry. So I don't know if, they don't know. They just have never had to do work in their lives. But I feel like their time has definitely ended. There's a critical mass of people aware of how the world works now. And there's alternatives like these cryptocurrencies that could provide a really a saving grace for the economy, because the economy of the world is kind of a measure of the faith that the world has in itself. It's kind of a measure of the world's confidence.
Right.
That's really what it's reflecting. It's like the stock markets, when people are happy and they go out and buy, it booms, When they stop buying, it stops. It's all us. It's all coming from us. So I feel like there's a very optimistic look, and then you've got changes going on in the earth, things shifting, moving into a new part of the Milky Way. We're always spinning around and having new influences coming in. The influences of Aquarius are intuition and the balancing of the genders. I think we're moving out of a patriarchy. Not necessarily into a matriarchy, but ideally into a balanced state of gender equality. I think we can see that in culture too.
Celebrating the yin and the yang.
Yeah, we need to get balance between those two.
Here's to balance. I hope the transition is peaceful and smooth.
Yeah. That's the difference between the Trump transition and the Bernie transition. That's why I voted for Bernie. Yeah. Because it's like, I think we're bound for revolution either way. But there could be a violent one, or there could be a relatively peaceful one. And we could just be like, we're done. You guys just step down from power, because everybody knows, okay, we won't kill you. Or maybe some people will. But
I think the only revolution worth a damn is the one inside our minds and the one inside our hearts.
Exactly. The physical revolution won't even do anything if there's not the underlying psychological revolution, which is the real one that's going on, and the only one that will make a real difference. And I think that one is definitely in full swing at this point. We have a vast illumination. A lot of people opening up their brains right now, really starting to understand that there's more here that they're not seeing. And not only that, but that the human story is like really 1,000 times more amazing, mysterious, intriguing. Like, we're actually like gods, if you think about it. If you believe in God, and if that's the way you describe a conscious universe, that's what we are too. We're microcosms of the whole universe.
And we're all creators.
Yeah, I mean, that's what being a god really is in a lot of people's mind. That's what being an artist is also. Being a creator, putting something new into this reality that wasn't there before. That's one of the only things you can do with your life that's worthwhile at all.
And if you really are usurping your ego to get that art out of you, then that is an expression of the Godhead.
For sure. Yeah, that's the whole point. I think that's what the whole universe is trying to get us to do, is to learn how to be a creator, how to govern yourself, how to run yourself, how to be a microcosm that reflects the macrocosm, how to join with the will of nature to do what nature's trying to do, And right, maybe someday we'll all be planets and we'll have little tiny humans on us, and
like the Martians,
stars, and yeah.
Thank you for your time, Trevor.
Yeah.
This was an enjoyable conversation.
This is very enjoyable. I'm glad we got to record it.
So, thank you.